The tray of Sèvres met the floor, and 30 women drew one breath and held it. Georgiana Devereux knelt in her dun-gray gown to gather the broken cups, her spine as straight on the boards as it had been in the chair. 2 winters she had served at Staveley, 2 winters since the bailiffs counted her father's chairs, and the name Devereux stopped meaning a barony and started meaning a debt. She mended the gowns the other women wore. She poured the tea they drank. In the pocket of her linen apron she kept a single folded paper, soft at the creases, a statement of her father's ruin she had read once and never needed to read again. Lady Augusta Knatchbull called her the Baron's daughter and let the table smile. Georgiana let them. Silence had kept her fed. Then Everard, Duke of Staveley, came down from the frontier to the Winter Hall, where 30 candidates stood arranged for him in bright silk, cold eyes, a signet ring, a jaw that gave nothing away. Only one woman in the house knew how to prepare the rare lapsang he took. He watched her the whole morning, and when his grandmother, the old Dowager Duchess, summoned Georgiana to the daily tea and set her at the Duke's own side, 2 exhausted people began to speak across a table where he was, for once, a man and not a coffer. But what the plain woman with the folded paper would come to overhear in that great house? Before the story begins, comment down below where you are watching from and what time it is there. If stories of justice, dignity, and love that arrives against all odds move you, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a member and help our channel. The candle had guttered twice before Georgiana Devereux finished the last hem, and still the great house of Staveley slept above her. Wiltshire lay under snow. It was the deep hour of a winter night in the year 1817, and in a cold anteroom off the servants' passage, a woman of 30 knelt over a tray of tea things she had polished until each surface returned her own face to her. She worked without haste. Her needle rose, dipped, rose again, through the torn flounce of a stranger's ball gown. Her spine did not touch the chair behind her. It never did. Somewhere overhead, a floorboard sighed and settled. Frost had drawn its ferns across the single window, and through the glass the winter moon laid a thin blue ribbon over the silver pot, the strainer, the row of cups turned mouth down to keep the dust from them. Georgiana set the last stitch and bit the thread. She held the gown to the candle, carmine silk, gold thread at the bodice, a torn flounce made whole again by her hands before dawn so that another woman might wear it and be admired in it. She folded it over her arm and rose. 2 years she had done this. 2 years since the bailiffs had walked through her father's house counting the chairs, since the word Devereux had stopped meaning a barony and started meaning a debt. She had been born to a name that opened doors. Now she opened them for others, and stood back while they passed through. The needle had taught her something the tutors never had. A stitch does not announce itself, it only holds. She carried the gown up the back stair, past the sleeping maids, to the blue chamber where Lady Augusta Knatchbull would wake and want her chocolate warm and her hair dressed and her gown ready as though it had never been anything but perfect. Georgiana hung it. She smoothed it with the flat of her hand. She left before the fire was lit, because the fire was not lit for her. Below, the tea things waited. 30 women would sit to breakfast in a few hours, and 30 women would be served, and one of them, watching, would find some small way to remind Georgiana of what she was. She did not dread it. Dread was a luxury of women with somewhere else to be. In the pocket of her linen apron lay a single folded paper. She had carried it so long the creases had gone soft as cloth. It was not a letter of love, nor a keepsake of the mother whose sapphires had been sold to pay a fraction of what was owed. It was a statement of debt, her father's debt, written in a clerk's neat hand, the sum at the bottom large enough to swallow whatever remained of the family whole. She kept it where she could feel it. A woman ought to know exactly how deep the water is she stands in. She had read it once by candlelight and never again. She did not need to. The figure lived behind her eyes the way a scar lives under a glove. Her father had written to her twice that winter, both letters in the same trembling hand, both saying the same thing without ever saying it, that he was sorry, that he could not mend it, that she must forgive an old man his ruin. She had not answered either. There was nothing to forgive that forgiveness would repair, and she would not spend words she could not afford. So she kept the paper, and served the tea, and let the great families of England mistake her silence for submission. Let them. Silence had kept her fed. Silence had kept her hands from being idle and her heart from being seen. A woman with nothing left learns to guard the little she has, and Georgiana Devereux guarded her composure the way a miser guards a last coin, knowing it was the only currency the world had not yet stripped from her. By the time the household stirred, Georgiana had the tea table laid in the small breakfast room, every cup in its place, the water heating, her gloved thin cotton gloves buttoned to the wrist. Her gown was the color they called dun, a beige gone gray, the plainest cloth in the house. Over it, the linen apron. About her shoulders, a shawl of pale wool, thin as breath, no jewel, no ribbon. Her dark hair sat low and smooth in a knot without ornament. The first of the candidates came down yawning, then two more, then a rush of them, silk hissing on the stairs, voices bright and sharp as broken ice. They arranged themselves at the long table in their morning finery, and the room filled with the perfume of hothouse flowers and ambition. Georgiana poured. She moved along the table without sound, a cup here, a cup there. She anticipated the raised hand before it rose, the emptied dish before it was pushed forward. She was, when she chose to be, nearly invisible, and she had chosen it every day for 2 years. Lady Augusta arrived last, as she always did, so that her arrival might be noticed. Copper curls dressed high, her morning gown the color of good wine. She took her chair at the head of the younger women and let her gaze travel the room until it found the plain figure at the sideboard. "Ah," she said, warm as sunlight, "there she is, our Baron's daughter." A few heads turned, a few smiles began. "You must not think me unkind," Augusta went on, "to the table, not to Georgiana. I find it rather touching. A gentlewoman by birth, and look how useful she has made herself. There is a lesson in it for all of us, I am sure." "You are too generous, Augusta," murmured a girl in yellow, hiding her mouth behind her fan. "I am generosity itself." Augusta lifted her cup and found it, of course, already full. She frowned as though the fullness displeased her. "The tea is cold." It was not cold. Georgiana had poured it that moment. "Forgive me, my lady." She reached for the pot to pour it fresh. "No, no." Augusta waved a ringed hand. "Bring the good service. The Sèvres. If we are to be looked at like cattle at a fair, we may at least drink from something worth the looking." Georgiana inclined her head and went to fetch it. The good service lived in the tall case in the passage, and she carried it back a piece at a time, the tray heavy with porcelain that cost more than her father's remaining name. She set it down. She began to arrange the cups. She saw Augusta's hand move. Anyone watching closely would have seen it. The deliberate drift of the wrist, the small push disguised as a gesture. The tray went. Porcelain met the floor in a bright, terrible music, cups splitting, the silver strainer rolling in a wide arc under the table, tea leaves scattered dark across the boards. The room drew one breath and held it. "Oh," said Augusta, hand pressed to her bosom, all wide-eyed sorrow. "How clumsy, and such lovely things." She looked at Georgiana over the wreckage. "Well, do not stand there. Pick them up." Georgiana looked at the floor. Then she looked, for one steady moment, at Lady Augusta Knatchbull. She did not speak. She did not flush. She lowered herself to her knees among the broken porcelain, spine straight as a taper, and began to gather the pieces into her apron, one by one, without hurry, as though she were sorting flowers, and not the ruins of a lady's cruelty. The girls tittered. Someone whispered the word servant loud enough to carry. Augusta watched, and the pleasure in her face was the quiet pleasure of a cat that has cornered something small. Vocatia. Georgiana's hands did not shake. This was the thing they could not forgive her, though none of them could have named it. They could take the porcelain and the fire and the fine name and the sapphires. They could put her on her knees, but the hands went on being steady, the back went on being straight, and the steadiness was hers, and it belonged to no one at that table. A shard had cut the heel of her palm. She felt the small heat of it through the worn glove and did not look down. She placed each broken piece into her apron with care, and when a jagged edge threatened the folded paper in her pocket, she turned her body a little, without seeming to keep the debt where it lived, close and unseen. "Mind your fingers," Augusta said sweetly. "I should hate to see you bleed on the good rug." "You are kind to think of it, my lady." Georgiana's voice was low, even, entirely without heat. She gathered the last of the silver. She rose. She did not brush at her skirts. For a moment, the two women faced each other across the small ruin, the one in wine-dark silk and rubies, the other in a gown the color of dust, with tea leaves clinging to her hem, and the difference between them was every visible thing in the world. Yet it was Augusta who looked away first, reaching too quickly for her fan, and she could not have said why. "Have fresh brought," she announced to the table, laughing, and the moment passed, and the chatter closed over it, like water over a dropped stone. Below stairs, Mrs. Prudence Holloway stood in the doorway with her ring of iron keys at her waist and had seen the whole of it. The housekeeper's mouth was a hard line under her white cap. She said nothing. It was not her place, and she was too old in service to imagine that saying anything would help. But when Georgiana came down with the broken pieces heaped in her apron, Mrs. Holloway took the tray from her without a word and set it aside, and looked at the girl's bleeding palm, and looked at her face, and found there no self-pity to comfort, and no anger to calm, only that terrible composure. "Sit," said Mrs. Holloway, "I'll bind it." "There is no need." "There is need, and I've said so. Sit." Georgiana sat. She let the older woman turn her hand over and clean the cut and wrap it in clean linen, and she watched the housekeeper's blunt red fingers work with a tenderness the rest of the house never showed her. "They'll break the whole service before they're done," Mrs. Holloway muttered, "just to watch you kneel. Then I shall kneel, and pick it up, and they will learn nothing, and I shall still have my hands." Georgiana flexed the bandaged fingers, testing. "That is a fair trade, Mrs. Holloway. Better than most I am offered." The housekeeper's frown deepened, but something moved behind her eyes, something that in a warmer woman might have been called respect. There came a knock at the passage door, brisk and light. A footman stood there, still in his night livery, breathless. "The Dowager Duchess is awake," he said. "She wants her tea, the smoke tea, and she wants it done proper, she says, or not brought at all." Mrs. Holloway's eyes flicked to Georgiana. "Well, there's your answer to who can do it. Herself, up before the birds, and she'll not touch a cup poured by any of those painted misses upstairs." "I have it warming already," Georgiana said, and rose, testing the bandage with a flex of her fingers. "Sit one moment more." The housekeeper pressed her back down with a hand on her shoulder, gentle for so blunt a woman. "It'll not spoil for the space of a breath. You've been on your feet since 2. It was true, though Georgiana had not counted the hours. She had learned not to. To count the hours was to invite the question of what they were for, and that was a door she did not open. She sat while the linen was tied off, and let herself, for the length of one breath, be still. "Your grandmother taught you the tea," she said. It was not a question. Everyone below stairs knew it, the old way, the proper way. She did. There's not another soul in this house can do it. Not the fine ladies upstairs with their monograms and their music masters. Mrs. Holloway tied off the linen. You remember that. When they've got you on your knees, you remember there's a thing you can do that not one of them can, and they know it, and that's why they can't abide the sight of you. Georgiana said nothing to that, but she carried the words with her the rest of the gray morning, folded away with the paper in her apron, another small weight kept close. She carried the dowager's tray up herself, along the cold corridor to the east rooms where the old woman kept her own hours and her own counsel. The Dowager Duchess Mariel Carew sat by her fire, small and upright, her white hair under a cap of lace, her hands folded over the head of an ebony cane. She did not look up when Georgiana entered. She waited until the cup was poured, the aroma of smoke and dark leaf rising between them, and then she lifted it and drank, and only then turned her bright blue eyes on the woman in the dun gown. "You have hurt your hand," the old woman said. "It is nothing, madam. It is a bandage. Bandages are not nothing." The dowager set down her cup with a click. "The porcelain, I suppose. I heard the crash from here. One learns the sound of a thing broken on purpose. It has a different note than a thing merely dropped." Georgiana kept her eyes lowered and said nothing. To agree was to complain, and she did not complain. The dowager studied her a long moment over the rim of the cup. She saw the straight back and the steady hands, and the face that gave away nothing, and she saw, too, the thing that the 30 girls downstairs could not see and would not have valued if they had, that here was the only creature under her grandson's roof who wanted nothing from him at all. "You brew this the way my own mother's woman brewed it," the old lady said at last, and it was as near to praise as she came with anyone. "They have all forgotten how. Everything worth the doing, they have forgotten how. Go on then, you will be wanted below." Georgiana curtsied and withdrew, but at the door the old voice caught her. "Girl, what is your name? Your Christian name?" "Georgiana, madam." The dowager turned back to her fire. "We shall see, Georgiana." What the old woman meant by it, she did not say, and Georgiana did not ask. She went back down to the still room with the words turning quietly in her, another weight, this one not so heavy as the rest. The house woke fully now. There was word from the North Road. A carriage had been sighted through the snow, outriders and a crest, moving fast toward Staveley. The candidates flew to their mirrors. Lady Augusta called for her copper curls to be dressed higher and her rubies brought, and 30 women began to array themselves in every brilliant color the dye-makers of England could sell, because the master of the house was coming home at last, and each of them meant to be the first thing his eye should land upon. Georgiana heard the commotion from the still room, where she stood measuring a spoonful of dark, smoke-cured leaf into a warmed pot, a rare tea, lapsang, that the old Dowager Duchess demanded, and that no one else in the household could brew without ruining. She measured it by feel, by memory, by the smell of the smoke. Her cut hand held the spoon as steadily as the whole one. Somewhere beyond the frosted windows the carriage was drawing nearer, and with it the man they were all painting themselves to please. She did not go to the window. She had no color to put on and no reason to be looked at. She only set the water to heat and turned the cups mouth up, one by one, and waited to serve. The water had not yet reached its boil when the wheels struck the cobbles of the outer court. The sound carried through the winter hall like a struck bell, and 30 women turned toward the tall windows at once, a single motion, plumes and curls and painted fans all tilting to the same north. Georgiana did not turn. She lifted the copper kettle by its handle and judged the tremor of the surface with her eyes alone. Lady Augusta was already at the glass. "He has come in the black traveling coach," she said, "and not the state one." She said it as though it were a fact she had earned. The others crowded the panes. Someone pinched color into her own cheeks. Someone else loosened a ringlet and let it fall against her throat with great care, as if by accident. The room smelled of hot iron and orange flower water, and the particular sweat of women waiting to be chosen. Georgiana warmed the small brown pot. She measured the leaf. Below in the court, boots came down onto wet stone. Everard, Duke of Staveley, stood a moment with one gloved hand still on the coach door, and looked up at his own house, as a man looks at a debt. 4 months on the western border had put the cold into his shoulders, and a grey powder of road dust across the dark blue of his coat. He did not brush it off. He had learned, out there, that the men who brushed themselves clean before their work was done were the men who did not finish it. "They are all assembled, Your Grace," murmured the steward at his elbow. "The families arrived through the week. Sir Horace Anson has taken the East Apartments." "Has he?" Everard drew off one glove, finger by finger. The signet caught the grey light. "Then the trap is baited and set, and I am the meat." The steward pretended not to hear. That, too, was a kind of loyalty. Inside, Mrs. Holloway swept through the winter hall with her keys ringing at her hip and her voice pitched to Carrie. "He is on the stair. Places, if you please, places." She had dressed the room herself since dawn, and now she looked at it the way a general looks at a line that will not hold. Her eyes found Georgiana at the side table and softened by a degree no one else would have marked. The doors opened. He came in without ceremony, which was itself a discourtesy to the 30 who had spent the morning arranging to be seen. He was taller than the portraits allowed, and colder, and the fine scar through his left brow gave his face a permanent slight question. He did not smile. He let his eyes travel the room once, the whole gaudy length of it, crimson and gold and rose and citron, and something in his jaw tightened as if the color pained him. Lady Augusta sank into a curtsy, timed to the second. "Your Grace, Staveley rejoices at your safe return." "Does it?" He said it flatly, not unkindly, walking as he spoke. He did not stop at her. He did not stop at any of them. He moved down the room, and the curtsies fell before him and rose behind him like a field under wind, and he acknowledged none of it, and by the time he reached the far hearth, the brightness in the women's faces had begun, very slightly, to curdle. Then he stopped. He had caught it under the smell of hot wax and perfume, faint and dark and resinous, the smoke of pine over cold water, a scent he had last breathed in a border post at the edge of the world, with his hands wrapped around a tin cup. Lapsang. Someone in this ridiculous room had made lapsang, and made it correctly. He turned his head. Georgiana stood at the side table with the small pot in both hands, pouring a thread of black amber tea into a single cup, her eyes on the stream and not on him. She wore dun. In that room she was the one grey stone in a bed of hothouse flowers, and it was the grey stone his eye had gone to, and he did not entirely understand why, and being a man who distrusted what he did not understand, he watched her. She set the pot down. She turned the cup a quarter turn on its saucer so the handle met the hand. Then she lifted her head and found him already looking, and she did not flinch and she did not simper. She inclined her head the precise depth owed to a duke by a servant and no deeper, and held it and rose. "Who is that?" Everard said. He did not lower his voice. A rustle went through the 30. Lady Augusta answered before Mrs. Holloway could reach him. "No one, Your Grace. A poor relation of the house. She sees to the linens and the trays." She smiled. "She has a gift for menial arts." "She has a gift for lapsang souchong," he said, "which is more than any woman in London can say, and I have asked half of them." He crossed the room. This time he did stop, in front of the side table, in front of Georgiana, and the whole assembly turned to watch him do it. "You made this." "I did, Your Grace." "Where did you learn it?" "From a book, Your Grace, and then from ruining a great deal of good leaf until the book was proved right." Something moved at the corner of his hard mouth and did not become a smile. He picked up the cup she had poured. the one meant for the dowager, and he drank from it there, standing, in front of them all. He drank it slowly. The room did not breathe. "It is correct," he said at last, as if delivering a verdict in a court. "It is the first correct thing I have been given in this house in a year." He set the cup down. "What is your name?" "Georgiana Devereux." At the name, over by the long windows, a corpulent man in wine-dark broadcloth went very still. Sir Horace Anson had been turning a heavy gold-headed cane between his ringed fingers, idly, the way a man counts money he already owns. Now the cane stopped. Devereux. He knew the name the way a spider knows a thread twitch 3 rooms away. He said nothing. He filed it, and resumed his turning, and watched the Duke's shoulders with his small, calculating eyes. "Devereux." Everard repeated it as though searching a ledger of his own. "Baron Devereux's house." "His daughter, your grace." She said it without shame and without pride, which was harder than either. "And his daughter pours my tea." He looked at her a moment longer than was comfortable for anyone in the room, least of all, though she did not show it, for her. Then he stepped back. "Carry on." He did not sit with the 30. He did not admire a single one of them. He walked the length of the winter hall to the door, and there he paused, and without turning his head he said, "The tea at 11 o'clock. Every morning. She makes it. No one else touches the pot." And he was gone, and the door closed on a silence you could have snapped like an icicle. For one heartbeat no one spoke. Then 30 women looked at Georgiana Devereux, and the looking had weight to it, and heat, and the beginning of something that would not stay under the silk much longer. Lady Augusta was the first to move. She crossed the floor with her carmine skirts hissing, and she came to the side table, and she looked down at the little brown pot as though it were a rat that had climbed onto the linen. "You planned this," she said, low, for Georgiana alone. "I made tea, my lady. You put yourself in his eye." Augusta's gloved fingers touched the rim of the empty cup he had drunk from, and drew back, as if the porcelain had kept the print of his mouth, and she could not bear it. "You, in that dress. You cannot even afford a ribbon, and you thought—" She stopped herself. When she went on, her voice had smoothed to something worse than anger, something patient. "You have no dowry. You have no name that is not mortgaged. Do you know what your father owes, and to whom?" Across the room, Sir Horace Anson's cane went still again. "I know to the shilling what my father owes," Georgiana said. "I keep the account myself. It is the only thing in this house I am permitted to keep." "Then you know you are not a rival," Augusta said. "You are furniture that happens to make tea." He noticed the pot. He did not notice you. She stepped back and lifted her voice for the room, bright and gay now, a hostess again. "Ladies, let us not stand about. His Grace is weary from the road. We shall have the harp in the blue drawing-room and let him rest to it." The 30 followed her out in a long, bright ribbon, and each one, passing the side table, gave Georgiana a small, cool measuring glance, taking her apart and pricing her, and putting her away again. She stood through all of it with her spine straight and her hands folded, and she let them look, because to a woman who has knelt on a stone floor to gather a dropped tray, being looked at is a small thing. When the doors had swallowed the last plume, Mrs. Holloway came out from the shadow by the servery, and her round face was troubled. "Georgiana." She took up the pot to carry it away, and her red hands were not quite steady on it. "You should not have poured it out here, where they could all see." He asked who made it. "I could hardly lie. You could have let another girl carry it in, and say nothing." The housekeeper set the pot down and pressed her knuckles to the table. "Child, there are 30 of them, and every one has a mother and a fortune and a design, and now His Grace has named you in front of the lot. They will not forget it by supper. Lady Augusta least of all." She lowered her voice further, though the room was empty. "And there are men in this house worse than Lady Augusta. Softer. They do not throw trays. Keep away from the East apartments." "I have no business in the East apartments." See that you keep none." Mrs. Holloway gathered the cup and saucer and the pot onto a tray, and at the door she stopped. 11 o'clock, every morning, he says. From tomorrow, you are the only pair of hands that touches that pot. Do you understand what that is, in a house like this? It is not a kindness. It is a place on a ledge, and there are 30 women who want the ledge, and only one who has it." She went out. Georgiana stood alone in the winter hall, and did not stand alone for long. The door at the servery end opened a hand's width, and a man came through it, who had no business in a room of unmarried women without a chaperone, and knew it, and did not care. Sir Horace Anson filled the doorway. He had left the harp and the 30 and followed the smell of advantage down a back stair, and now he crossed the floor toward the side table, unhurried, the gold head of his cane winking with each step. "Miss Devereux," he said her name the way a man tests the weight of a coin. "I knew your father, once, a generous host in his day, before the day turned. He is generous still, Sir Horace. He has little else left to give." The small eyes crinkled. He liked that. She saw him like it, and it turned her stomach. A quick tongue and clever hands, his grace tells us. He stopped an arm's length off, closer than was decent, and looked at her the way he had looked at his own cane in the window, a thing owned and not yet spent. "I hold a paper with your father's mark on it. You know this. I saw you know it when I spoke my name across the room." He let that sit. "A girl in your position wants friends who hold papers, not enemies. Pour my tea in the mornings as prettily as you pour his, and be pleasant to me when I pass, and that paper can sleep in its drawer a good many years." Georgiana folded the last cloth, corner to corner, and set it square. "And if I am not pleasant, then papers wake," Anson said gently, "and houses are sold, and old men go to rooms with bars on the window." He smiled. "But we need not speak of unpleasant things. We are friends, you and I, are we not?" She lifted her eyes to his and held them, and did not step back, though every nerve told her to. "You have made your terms very clear, Sir Horace. I understand you completely." Which was not a yes, and he was too pleased with himself to hear that it was not. He inclined his head, satisfied, and turned his broad wine-dark back on her, and went out the way he had come. Only when the door had closed did Georgiana let her shoulders drop the half-inch she had held them raised. She did not weep. She had not the habit of it. She took stock instead, the way she took stock of leaf and linen. 2 men now had marked her in a single morning, and one of them owned her father, and she was the only soul under this roof who understood that the pretty season of brides was a set of jaws closing very slowly on the house of Staveley. She let herself, for one moment, uncurl the fingers of her right hand, where all through the Duke's inspection she had held something against her palm. She let herself, for one moment, uncurl the fingers of her right hand, where all through the Duke's inspection she had held something against her palm. It was a letter, worn soft at the creases from carrying, folded and refolded until the ink at the folds had begun to give way. The seal was Anson's. She had opened it herself a fortnight past, in the linen room, by a single candle, and she had read what her father had signed, and she had understood before her father ever would that a man does not lend at that rate to be repaid. He lends to own. She did not open it now. She knew every word. She only refolded it once more along its tired creases and put it away in the pocket beneath her apron, close against her, where the paper had grown warm from her body over the long weeks of keeping it. Somewhere above, faint through the floors, a harp began, and a woman's laugh climbed brightly over it, and the whole gaudy machine of the season turned another notch on its axle. Georgiana gathered the linen from the side table and shook it out and folded it in 3 sharp motions, corner to corner, the way she folded everything, because a straight edge was a thing she could still make true in a house where nothing else was. Up in the muniment room at the other end of the great house, Everard stood at a cold window with his coat still dusted from the road and looked down into the outer court where his coach was being drawn away to the stables. Thaddeus Fanshawe had come in quietly behind him, the leather case under his arm, his ink-stained fingers already opening it. "You will want to see these tonight, not tomorrow," Fanshawe said. "Anson has moved while you were on the border. He and 4 of the families have folded their credit together. Every mortgage in the county that touched Staveley, he has bought or brokered. He holds the paper on half your neighbors and a fair weight of your own." The lawyer laid a sheet on the sill in the gray light. "He did not come here for a bride for his money. He came to be near the man he means to bankrupt." Everard did not look at the paper yet. He was looking down at the court, at nothing, at the wet stones where his boots had stood an hour before. "There is a woman in this house," he said, "who pours the only correct cup of tea between here and the wall, and who is the daughter of a ruined baron, and who did not once, in the whole of my inspection, ask me for anything with her eyes." He turned from the window. "Every other soul under this roof wants something from me they have not said aloud. Find out what she wants. And if she wants nothing, then she is either a saint or a better player than all of them," Everard said. "And I should like to know which, before she is standing behind my chair, with a pot of boiling water, every morning at 11. He took up the sheet at last, and his cold eyes went down it, and at the foot of the page, in a clerk's neat hand, among the mortgaged houses of the county, he read a name he had heard for the first time not an hour before: Devereux. He stood very still, the way Anson had stood by the window, the way a man stands when 2 threads he had thought unconnected pull taut in his hand at once. "Fanshawe," he said, "whose paper holds the Devereux debt?" The lawyer leaned and looked, and his high forehead creased. "Anson's," he said. "All of it, to the shilling." The Dowager Duchess Mariel Carew rapped her ebony cane twice against the parquet, and the whole winter salon went still. 30 gowns, in 30 loud colors, turned toward the small woman by the window. She did not raise her voice. She never had to. "The tea," she said, "will be prepared by the girl in gray, every morning, beginning now." Georgiana had been folding a shawl over Lady Augusta's chair. Her hands did not stop, but they slowed. She set the shawl down, smoothed it once, and looked up. The old woman's blue eyes were fixed on her with the frank appetite of someone who had spent a lifetime reading rooms and had grown bored of easy pages. Augusta's leaf fan snapped shut. "Your Grace, surely one of us." "One of you cannot brew lapsang without scalding the leaf," the dowager said. "I have watched you try. Sit down." Augusta sat. It cost her something, and everyone saw the cost, and that was the point. So it began, the way most changes begin, without announcement. A place was set at the long table each morning, and the place was Georgiana's, and beside it, at the head, sat the Duke. Everard of Staveley did not want tea. He wanted the border accounts reconciled, the Lisbon dispatches answered, the roof of the east wing surveyed before the autumn rains found it. He wanted, most of all, to be left alone. What he had instead was a room full of women arranged for his inspection like plate at auction, and a grandmother who had decided the arrangement would include a tea ceremony he could not decline without insult. The first morning he said nothing at all. He drank what she poured. He noted, without meaning to, that it was correct, not merely hot and dark, correct. The smoke sat under the flavor instead of drowning it. He set the cup down and went back to his letters, and Georgiana cleared the service without a sound, and neither of them spoke a single word. The second morning he watched her hands. She warmed the pot first, poured the water off, measured the leaf by eye and never by spoon. She did not perform. That was what struck him. Every other woman in the salon performed, ceaselessly, exhaustingly, from the moment they woke. The laugh timed, the wrist turned to catch the light, the sorrow rehearsed for effect. This one simply worked. as though the work were the whole of it and he merely happened to be in the room. "You do not look at me," he said. The pot did not waver. "I am attending to the tea, Your Grace. The others look at me a great deal." "The others," she said, "are not making your tea." He almost smiled. He caught it before it reached his mouth, but she had already turned away, and something in the set of her shoulders told him she had heard it anyway. By the 5th morning, the letters stayed in his coat. It was the dowager who had built the trap, and she watched it close with the patience of a woman who had arranged 3 marriages and undone 2. She sat at the far end each day with her caxemira shawl and her camafeu brooch, and said very little, and missed nothing. She saw her grandson's jaw, which had been locked since he came down from the frontier, loosen by a degree. She saw the gray girl's spine, which had been braced against the room like a soldier's, ease when the 2 of them fell to talking. She noted these things and kept them, the way she kept everything, for later. The talk, when it came sideways. "You were at the border," Georgiana said one morning, pouring. It was not a question. There had been a dispatch in the papers, and she read the papers Mrs. Holloway carried up with the ashes. "I was." They say the passes are held. They say a great many things in London that are not true in Wiltshire. He turned his signet ring once around his finger, a habit she had learned to read. He did it when he was deciding whether to speak. The passes are held because men froze holding them. The word for that in a drawing room is secured. She set his cup before him, and the word for it at the border? He looked at her then, fully, for the first time. The scar through his eyebrow caught the window light. "There isn't one," he said. "That is rather the trouble." She did not offer sympathy. She did not tell him it must have been dreadful, or brave, or any of the words the salon would have reached for. She poured her own cup. The dowager had ruled that she was to drink as well, another small outrage to the 30, and said only, "No, there wouldn't be." The rain thickened against the glass. Somewhere below, a door closed and the whole east wing seemed to sigh in its old timbers. He watched her turn the pot a quarter turn on the tray, a small precise thing, and found he was steadier for having watched it. "My grandmother chose you for this," he said. "Do you know why? She has not told me. She tells no one anything until it has already happened." He almost smiled again, and this time let it come. It is her chief cruelty and her chief mercy, usually the same act. He sat with that. In 3 months of return, no one had let a silence simply stand. Everyone rushed to fill it, to soothe him, to angle for the estate behind his grief. She let it be a silence, and drank her tea, and the not rushing was the most restful thing that had happened to him since he crossed the Channel. What he did not say was that he had begun to measure his days by the quarter hour after dawn. Word of the arrangement moved through the great house the way water moves through a cracked wall, slowly, and into every room. Mrs. Prudence Holloway heard it in the still room and set down her keys and permitted herself, for one moment, a smile she would have denied under oath. She had watched the girl kneel to gather a spilled tray, spine straight as a plumb line, and had thought, "That one will either break or rise, and I know which, and I mean to be there." Now she took to sending up the good honey with the tray, the dark heather honey kept back for the family, and said nothing about it to anyone. The 30 noticed too, and the 30 were less kind. Lady Augusta Knatchbull was not a fool she could have managed. Augusta understood exactly what a place at the Duke's right hand meant, understood it in her accobrado curls and her rubies, and the ambition that had brought her father's carriage the length of England. She had come to be chosen. She had not come to watch a lady's companion in dun cotton drink tea beside the man, while the rest of them arranged themselves along the walls like ornament. She began, as such women begin, with the small blades. "How restful it must be," she said one afternoon, loud enough to carry, to have no reputation left to guard. One may sit anywhere. A ripple of laughter down the row of gowns. Georgiana was returning the service to the tray. She did not look up. Restful, she agreed. Yes, and carried the tray out, and the laughter, having nothing to catch on, died in the air behind her. It was worse for Augusta than an argument would have been. An argument she could have won. The girl simply declined to be a surface anything could stick to. The next day, Augusta tried the tea itself. She rose from her chair, crossed to the table before the Duke had come down, and lifted the lid of the warmed pot as though inspecting it. "Is this how it is done in service?" she asked, sweet as spun sugar. "I confess I never learned." "One doesn't." Georgiana took the lid gently from her hand and set it back. "No," she said, "one doesn't." She did not add that Augusta had let the heat escape and the leaf would want a moment longer now. She simply added the moment and poured, and when the Duke came down, the tea was perfect, and Augusta had nothing to point to but her own reflection in the silver. But Augusta had a longer knife, and she was already sharpening it. She had written to a man in London, a heavy, ringed, red-faced man of Indian fortune who had lately taken an interest in Staveley's affairs, and in the affairs of every family who had daughters in the running. Sir Horace Anson answered his correspondence promptly. He liked to know things. Knowing things was, in the end, the whole of his trade. Georgiana did not yet know Anson's name. She knew only that the credit which was strangling her father was the same credit she had begun to hear murmured of below stairs. A note called here, a mortgage refused there. 3 good families in the county suddenly and unaccountably unable to borrow a shilling against land they had held for centuries. She kept the letter of her father's debt folded against her stays where it had lived for a year, and she had begun, without quite deciding to listen. The Duke, meanwhile, was learning to speak. It happened slowly, and it happened at the tea table, and nowhere else. In the salon he was Staveley. The title, the roof, the coffer 30 women wished to marry. At that table, for 1/4 hour, he found he could be a man who was tired, who had buried friends in frozen ground, who did not know how to be looked at as anything other than an asset. She asked him nothing she could sell. That, he slowly understood, was the rarest thing she owned. "Why do you not compete?" he asked her one gray morning. The rain had come at last, and it ran down the tall windows in sheets. The others would give a great deal for the seat you fill and dislike. "I do not dislike the seat. You dislike being watched. I have watched you dislike it." She considered the pot. "I dislike being watched by people who are pricing me," she said. "That is a different thing." "And I am not pricing you." "No, Your Grace." She lifted her eyes and met his, calm and gray-green and entirely without fear, and it undid something in his chest he had thought frozen solid. "You are drinking your tea." He laughed. Aloud, this time, before he could stop it. A short, rusted sound, as though the hinge of it had gone stiff from disuse. Down the length of the salon, 30 heads turned. The Duke of Staveley had not laughed once since his return, and he had done it now, at dawn, over a teapot, at something the girl in gray had said. Augusta's fan stilled in her lap. Her father had not sent her across England to watch a servant make the man laugh. The Dowager Duchess heard the laugh from her chair by the far window and did not look up from her needlework, but her needle paused, 1 stitch, and then went on. Later she said to no one in particular, "So," in the tone of a woman who has watched the last card fall exactly where she laid the deck. That evening, Mrs. Holloway found Georgiana in the still room, wrapping the tea in its lead paper against the damp. "You'll mind yourself with Lady Augusta," the housekeeper said, low. "She's written to London, to Anson. I've seen the direction on the letter go out." Georgiana's hands went quiet on the paper. Anson. Sir Horace Anson, nabob. Owns half the paper in 3 counties now, and buying more. Mrs. Holloway's mouth thinned. The families that can't borrow. It's his doing. Everyone below stairs knows it, and no one above will say it. He's got his hooks in the season somehow. I don't understand the how of it, but I know the smell of it. The name settled into Georgiana like a stone into still water. Anson, the credit, the debt against her stays, her father's shaking hands, the relentless, patient tightening she had felt for a year and mistaken for mere misfortune. Not misfortune, a hand. A single hand, closing. She thought of the Baron as she had left him, bent in his Puido black coat, his watch chain hanging empty, telling her the debt would come right, if only they were patient. He had believed it. He was an honest man, and honest men were the easiest of all to strangle, because they kept expecting the rope to be a misunderstanding. "You know a great deal, Mrs. Holloway," she said softly. "I know where the tray goes," the housekeeper said, "and I hear what's said over it." Same as you. She pressed the jar of dark honey into Georgiana's hands, unasked, and went out. Georgiana stood alone among the drying herbs and the lead-wrapped tea, and did not move for a long while. She thought of the Duke turning his signet ring when he was deciding whether to trust the room. She thought of the 3 families ruined this season, and of her father's watch chain hanging empty because the watch had gone to the pawnbroker, and of a red-faced man in London she had never seen, pulling threads she had only just felt against her skin. She unfolded the letter of the debt. She had read it 100 times. She read it again now, and for the first time she read it not as her shame, but as evidence. A single knot in a net she was only beginning to see the shape of. Upstairs, in the library, the Duke sat late with a lawyer. Mr. Thaddeus Fanshawe had ridden down from London with a leather case and ink still on his fingers, and he had spread the border accounts across the great table and found, threaded through them, something he did not like. Loans that should have been the Crown's own were held privately. Interest that should have flowed to the Treasury went sideways, into pockets he could not yet name. Whose paper, the Duke had asked him, holds the Devereux debt? Fanshawe had leaned and looked, and his high forehead had creased. Anson's, he had said. All of it, to the shilling. Now the Duke stood at the dark window with a cold cup in his hand. She had poured it hours ago, and he had forgotten to drink it, and he noticed that too, that he had let her tea go cold while he thought, and he turned the name over. Anson. The same man who had been buying up the county's debt all season. The same season his grandmother had staged in his own house. 30 daughters of 30 indebted families paraded through his salon. He set the cup down very carefully, as though it might break, though it was he who had gone suddenly still. "Fanshawe," he said, "every family whose daughter is in this house, find me their debts, all of them. I want to know who holds the paper on each." Fanshawe took off his fine-rimmed spectacles and polished them slowly, which was what he did when he was afraid of an answer. "Your Grace, if it is all one hand, then it is not a season," the Duke said. "It is a siege." He looked toward the ceiling, toward the wing where 30 women slept and one did not. "And I have been feeding the enemy tea every morning without knowing which of them holds the knife." But he was wrong about that, though he did not yet know it. There was one in the house who held no knife at all, who had folded the whole shape of it against her stays that very night, and understood, before the Duke did, that the tea-table, where they had both learned to breathe again, was set squarely in the center of the trap, and she had already decided, in the still room among the drying herbs, that she would be the one to say so. The ledgers were not meant for her eyes. Georgiana had come to the estate office at the dowager's request, to fetch the old woman's spectacles, forgotten among the day's correspondence. The candle guttered, rain tapped the leaded panes. She found the spectacles beneath a stack of papers, and it was the crest at the top of one page that stopped her hand. Anson, the nabob's seal, pressed in wine-dark wax. She should have set it down. A servant did not read her betters' letters, but she had learned, in 100 narrow rooms, that a woman who did not read was a woman who did not survive, and her father's ruin had begun with a document he never troubled to open. She read. The words were plain enough on the surface. Terms of credit, rates of interest, a schedule of repayments owed to a consortium of houses, Natchbull among them, Anson at its head. But the figures beneath the courtesies made her go still. The candle threw her shadow long across the wall, and she did not move to trim it. Stavely owed money, that she had guessed. Every great house bled a little at the seams. What she had not guessed was the shape of the wound. The debts had been bought, quietly, one at a time, over 2 years, gathered into a single fist. Merchants who had once held small notes against the dukedom had been paid to surrender them, and now every farthing Stavely owed ran through Anson's counting-house and no other. The season, the 30 daughters in their bright silks, the whole glittering pretense of a duke choosing a bride. It was a curtain. Behind it, a noose was being measured. A footstep in the passage. She folded the paper along its old creases and slid it beneath the others, precisely as it had lain, and had the spectacles in her hand when Mrs. Holloway put her head round the door. "There you are. Her Grace is asking." "I found them," Georgiana said. Her voice did not shake. She had schooled it too long for that. She carried the spectacles up the cold stair, and every step she took, the figures came with her. The Dowager Duchess sat by the fire in the small drawing-room, ebony cane at her knee, a book of sermons open and unread upon her lap. She took the spectacles without looking up. "You were slow," she said. "The candle in the office is nearly gone, Your Grace. Everything in that office is nearly gone." The old woman set the spectacles upon her nose and turned them on Georgiana instead of the book. Her blue eyes were very bright for 71 years. "You have a color you did not have this morning, or rather you have lost one. What did you see?" Georgiana folded her hands. "Nothing that concerns me, Your Grace." "A liar keeps her hands still," the dowager said. "You keep yours too still. Sit." She did not sit. To sit was to be a granddaughter and not a servant, and she had not yet decided which was more dangerous in this house. But she did not leave. 3 days passed before she saw the whole of it. She saw it in pieces, the way one sees a country by lamplight from a moving carriage. She saw it when Sir Horace Anson arrived, unannounced and unhurried, his rings catching the light as he laid his gold-headed cane across the hall table, as though he owned the wood. She saw it in the way the steward bowed a half-degree lower to him than to guests of far greater blood. She saw it in the ledger of the household stores, where she had been sent to count linen, and found instead that even the candles were bought on terms set elsewhere, and she saw it in the tea. The morning ceremony had become the fixed hour of the day, the one appointment the Duke did not delegate or postpone. The dowager had made it so, and Georgiana understood now that the old woman made few arrangements without a second purpose folded inside the first. The rare lapsang came from a single locked chest, and only Georgiana knew the trick of its steeping. How long, how hot, how the smoke of it wanted a patient hand and not a hurried one. So she steeped it, morning upon morning, and set it before Everard, Duke of Stavely, while 30 women in the next room practiced their laughter. On the 4th morning, Anson joined them. He came in without invitation, lowered his bulk into a chair too small for it, and smiled the smile of a man who never needed to ask. "Your Grace keeps a strange table," he said. "A duke and a serving woman and the tea things. Very rustic, very old-fashioned." "I keep the table I please," Everard said. His voice was flat as slate. "You are early, Anson. The papers are not due until quarter day. Papers keep better when a man visits them now and then." Anson took the cup Georgiana poured, though it had not been poured for him. His small eyes flicked to her, weighed her, and dismissed her as furniture. One likes to see one's investments thrive. Georgiana set the pot down. She did not look at either man. She had learned that a woman was safest when she seemed to hear nothing, and she heard everything. "You speak of Staveley as an investment," Everard said. "I speak of Staveley as an investment," Anson drank. "A friend who understands that a title is a fine thing and a solvent title is a finer one. The season goes well, I trust? A bride, an heir, an alliance. These things reassure lenders. A dukedom that looks to its future is a dukedom worth carrying. And one that does not?" Anson set his cup in its saucer with great care, and the small click of it was louder than it should have been. "Is called in," he said pleasantly. "But we are far from such unpleasantness, are we not?" It was not a question. Everard did not answer it, and Georgiana, refilling the water that did not need refilling, understood the whole machine at last, every gear of it turning in the quiet room. They did not mean to marry him off. They meant to hang the choosing over his head like a blade on a thread, quarter after quarter, so that the Duke of Staveley would dance to the tune of the men who held his paper. And it was not Staveley alone. A dukedom carried votes, influence, the ear of the crown. Break Staveley to the bridle, and you broke a piece of the kingdom's spine, and let the consortium price the rest. She was the only one outside the plot who knew its full shape. The steward saw the payments and not the pattern. The dowager suspected and could not prove. The duke felt the tightening and had not yet named the hand. Only Georgiana, who read letters she was not meant to read and heard words spoken over her bowed head as though she were a chair, held both halves at once. That knowledge sat in her like a swallowed coal. Anson left before noon, his carriage churning the wet gravel. The house exhaled, and Georgiana carried the cold tea things down to the still room, where the drying herbs hung in bunches from the beams, and the light came gray through one high window, and she stood a long moment with her hands flat on the scrubbed table, breathing. She could say nothing. A woman of no name, accusing a nabob of engineering the ruin of a dukedom, she would be laughed out of the county, or worse, marked as dangerous and cast out before the week was through. The carriage that had brought her here could carry her back to nothing just as easily. She could say everything. To the one man with the standing to act, and she had already decided, in the still room among the drying herbs, that she would be the one to say so. The chance came that night. She had thought to catch him after the household slept, but the Duke did not keep the hours of other men. She found him in the library near midnight, coat off, cravat loosed, a single branch of candles burning, and a map of the estate's mortgaged acres spread beneath his hands. He did not startle when she entered. He never startled. The scar through his brow lifted a fraction, which was as near to surprise as he came. "The tea is finished for the day," he said. "I have not come about the tea, Your Grace." That stopped him. He straightened. In the candlelight, his eyes were the color of a blade left out in frost. A woman with sense would have curtsied and gone. She shut the door instead, quietly, and stood with her back to it. "You will forgive me," she said. "What I have to say cannot be said with the door open. You presume a great deal." "I do. You may dismiss me for it in the morning." She drew a breath. "Sir Horace Anson does not mean to see you married. He means to see you owned." The silence that followed had weight. Somewhere in the house a clock struck the half-hour and finished before either of them moved. "Go on," Everard said. "Only that." So she told him. She did not soften it, and she did not adorn it. She told him of the letter she had no right to read, and the crest upon it, and the schedule of debts gathered into one hand over 2 slow years. She told him what Anson had said over the tea things, and what the words had meant beneath their courtesy. She told him of the votes and the crown and the price of a broken spine. She spoke plainly, in short sentences, the way one lays out coins on a table for counting, and she watched the frost in his eyes turn to something harder. When she finished, he did not speak at once. He crossed to the window, and she saw his shoulders against the black glass, still as a man carved. You understand what you are telling me, he said at last, not turning. You are telling me that every man who has bowed in my hall this fortnight has done so with a knife behind his back. Not every man, but the ones who matter, yes. And you learned this how? By reading my correspondence. He turned then. I could have you turned out at dawn. A servant who reads her master's letters is a servant no house will take. You could, Georgiana said. I have counted that cost. I read it because my father did not read his, and I watched what unread paper made of him. I would rather be turned out honest than stay and let you walk into the noose smiling. Something moved behind his face. He came back to the map, and he looked at it now as though seeing it for the first time. Not a list of acres, but the drawn plan of a siege. Why tell me, he said. You gain nothing. You risk everything. A cleverer woman would have kept her head down and let the house fall on someone else. I have kept my head down for 30 years, Your Grace. It has bought me a gray dress and a debt I did not make. Her chin lifted. I find I have run out of the habit. For the first time since he had returned from the frontiers, the Duke of Staveley looked at a woman and did not see a bride, a burden, or a piece of furniture. He saw an ally. The novelty of it stilled him. If you are wrong, he said slowly, I will have accused the richest man in 3 counties on the word of a tea-maker, and I will be finished. I am not wrong. No, he said. I begin to think you are not. He set his hand flat on the map, over the mortgaged fields, and the ducal signet on his finger caught the candle. Fanshawe must see this. My lawyer. He is worth 10 of Anson if he is given something to hold. He looked up sharply. Can you find the letter again? Not take it. Find it. He will need to know it exists before he knows how to reach it. It is in the estate office, beneath the quarter-day accounts. It will be there until quarter-day, when Anson comes for his answer. Then we have until quarter-day. He said we, and did not seem to notice that he had said it. Georgiana noticed. You have handed me a war, Miss Devereux, and no army to fight it with. You have more than you think, she said. You have the one thing Anson has not troubled to buy. And what is that? Someone in this house who is not for sale. He looked at her a long moment. The candles burned down a fraction. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the silence of the wet garden pressed against the glass. Go to bed, he said at last, and it was not a dismissal, but something gentler, roughened at its edge. Say nothing. Pour the tea as you always do. Let Anson believe the house sleeps. He paused. And Miss Devereux, if you are seen near that office again before quarter-day, I cannot protect you. Do you understand me? Perfectly, Your Grace. She curtsied and turned to the door. Her hand was on the latch when he spoke again. You said your father did not read his paper. A hesitation, rare in him. What became of him? Georgiana did not turn around. He is alive, she said, which is worse, I think, than if he were not. He wears a watch chain with no watch on it and cannot look me in the face. She let herself out before he could answer, and climbed the cold stair to her narrow room beneath the eaves, and lay a long time listening to the house settle. She had done it. She had put the whole terrible truth into the hands of the one man who could wield it, and in doing so she had made herself something she had never been in any house she served. Necessary, not tolerated, not endured, necessary. It was not safety, it was the opposite of safety. A servant who knew a great man's secrets was a servant with a target sewn into her gray dress. If Anson learned that the truth had reached the Duke, he would need to know how, and the how was a woman of no name who could be silenced with a word to the housekeeper and a coin to the coachman. But down in the estate office, beneath the quarter-day accounts, the letter waited, and in the library, a duke who had spent 5 years being counted like a purse had begun, for the first time, to count back. Georgiana closed her eyes. She did not sleep. 3 floors below, Everard had not moved from the map. He stood with his signet ring turned toward the candle, watching the light run along the ducal crest his fathers had worn, and he thought of the tea-maker's steady voice laying out his ruin coin by coin, as though she were setting a table. What he did not say, even to himself, even alone in the dark, that in 5 years no one, not his grandmother, not his lawyer, not one of the 30 daughters paraded before him, had looked at him and seen a man worth warning rather than a prize worth taking. He folded the map with care. He would send for Fanshawe at first light, and he would say nothing to the house, and he would let the great engine of Anson's patience turn one more quarter believing itself unopposed, and quarter day, when it came, would find the Duke of Staveley no longer alone at his own table. The kettle was already singing when Georgiana crossed the winter salon, and 30 pairs of eyes turned to watch her pass. She did not slow. The morning ceremony had been moved forward an hour, and no one had told her why. She only knew that the long table wore its best linen, that the Sèvres had been set out 3 settings too many, and that Lady Augusta stood at the hearth with her gloved hands folded like a woman waiting for a curtain to rise. Georgiana set down the caddy. She measured the lapsang leaf by eye, as she always did, and warmed the pot. Around her the room hummed with a pitch she had learned to read. The scarlet gowns had drawn closer together. The whispering had a shape now, a direction, and the direction was her. "You brew it beautifully," Augusta said. "One would almost think you had been trained to serve." "One is trained to do many things," Georgiana said, and poured. The Dowager Duchess had not yet come down, nor had the Duke. That, too, was arranged. Augusta drifted from the hearth. Her rubies caught the window light and threw it about the walls, and the ostrich plumes in her hair nodded with each measured step. She stopped at the foot of the table, where the great copper urn steamed at a low boil, and laid one lace-gloved finger against its belly, as though testing the warmth of a friend. "Tell me," she said, pitching her voice for the room, "how does a woman of your particular circumstance come to be so very at home among her betters?" The needle hum of conversation stopped. Somewhere a fan clicked shut. Georgiana finished the pour she had begun. She set the pot down on its trivet with a sound no louder than a heartbeat. "I come from Devereux," she said, "in Berkshire." Devereux. Augusta tasted the name. "The barony." "Yes. I made certain inquiries, you understand, as any of us might. One likes to know the company one keeps." Deep down, Georgiana already knew what was coming. She had known since the table was set for an audience. "Your father," Augusta went on, "is Baron Devereux, a man of ancient blood and, I am given to understand, a great many creditors. £6,000, was it? To the house of Anson chiefly. The estate mortgaged twice over, the plate sold, the library sold, the very watch from his waistcoat pocket." She turned, delighted, to the room. "Pawned in Reading not 4 months ago." The scarlet gowns drew breath as one. Georgiana's hands were quite still upon the linen. She did not lower her eyes. "You have been thorough," she said. "I have been careful." Augusta stepped nearer. There is a difference between a lady fallen on misfortune and a servant in a lady's borrowed manners. We should none of us like to confuse the two. It would be a grave thing, would it not, to sit at his Grace's own table beside a girl whose father cannot pay a chandler's bill? A murmur ran the length of the room and doubled back. "You have poured our tea," Augusta said, softer now, and that was worse. "You have laced our stays, and mended our hems, and carried our trays, and all the while you carried this, a begging letter in your apron. I wonder his Grace's grandmother suffered you near the china at all." Georgiana thought of the letter, folded small against her ribs, the ink gone brown where her father's hand had shaken. She thought of the last line, which asked nothing and confessed everything. She kept her spine straight. "My father's debts are my father's," she said. "They have never touched this pot, nor this table, nor any leaf I have measured out for you. They touch everything you are, Augusta said, and she reached for the urn. It happened in the breath between one word and the next. Augusta's gloved hand closed on the copper handle and swung the vessel from its stand, and the boiling water came in a bright rope through the steam, aimed low and aimed sure, straight at the front of Georgiana's dun skirt and the hands that rested there. Georgiana moved. She had spent 3 months learning the weight of that urn, the exact laziness of its balance, and her body knew before her mind did. She stepped inside the ark, not away from it. Her hand came up beneath Augusta's wrist and turned it a 1/4 inch, no more, and the rope of water fell short and hissed across the empty linen and the bare boards beyond, blooming steam, soaking nothing but wood. The urn clanged down, a cup shattered on the floor. For a moment, no one breathed. Augusta stood with her emptied vessel and her ruined intention, and her face did a thing it had never done in company. It slipped. The triumph guttered. Then she recovered, and drew herself up, and her voice climbed to fill the silence she had lost. "You see," she cried, to the room, to the doorway, to the god of drawing rooms. "You see how she handles herself, like a woman raised among potboys. Is this the grace we came for? Is this what Stavely means to set among us?" No one answered. 30 women looked at the steaming floor, and at Georgiana's dry, unburned hands, and understood in their separate silences exactly what had been attempted and exactly what had failed. It did not matter. Augusta had lost the scald and would take the field another way. "Mrs. Holloway," she called. The housekeeper had come to the doorway at the sound of breaking china, her keys still at her hip, her round face gone pale. She did not step forward. Her hand tightened on the doorframe. "Mrs. Holloway, you will fetch the steward," Augusta said. "This person is to be gone from Stavely by dark. Her character is unfit. Her family is bankrupt. She has imposed upon this household under false colors, and I will not sleep beneath the same roof as a fraud." She turned, and her voice softened again into that lethal sweetness. "Unless, of course, any lady here wishes to speak for her." The scarlet gowns studied their gloves. Not one lip parted. Georgiana looked from face to face. She had dressed most of them. She had pinned that one's curls before the Duke's return, and mended the hem this one had torn on the stair, and she had listened, over 3 long months, to the small cruelties they paid each other in the dark. She had expected nothing. Still the silence cost her something, and her chin lifted a fraction to carry it. "You need not send for the steward," she said. "I hear you well enough." The room turned to her. "I will not be carried out," Georgiana said. "I will walk. But I will say one thing first, and you will let me say it, because it is the last civility this house owes me, and I mean to collect it." Augusta's mouth thinned. "Say your piece and go." Georgiana set the trivet straight. It was a small motion, and it steadied her. "You spoke of my father's creditors," she said. "You named the house of Anson. You named it lightly, as one names a shop." She let her gaze move to the window, where far below in the gray courtyard, a wine-colored traveling coach stood waiting, with a gold-headed cane laid across its seat. "Sir Horace Anson holds my father's paper. He holds a great deal of paper. He holds yours, Lady Augusta, though you may not know by how many hands the note has passed. He holds the mortgages of 4 of the families that sent their daughters into this room. He means to hold Stavely too, and through Stavely, a debt the crown itself has not the coin to answer." The silence changed its texture. "You call me a fraud," Georgiana said quietly. "You do not know what a fraud looks like. It does not pour tea. It waits in a coach in the yard and lets young women do its cutting for it. Wild." Augusta's fan snapped open. Wild talk. The raving of a dismissed servant. "Perhaps," Georgiana said. "Dismiss me then." "It changes none of it." She untied her apron. She did it without hurry, The way she did everything, folding the linen along its old creases and laying it upon the table beside the pot she had brewed. She drew off the pewed cotton gloves and set them atop the apron. And then, because a thing done cleanly is a thing that cannot be taken back, she smoothed the front of her plain gray skirt, straightened her cuffs, and stood in the middle of the winter salon as herself. No tray, no keys, no borrowed office, only a woman with a straight back and nothing left to lose. "I will be gone by dark," she said. "You need trouble no one to see it done." She turned for the door. That was when the whispering began behind her, not cruel now, but frightened, the low, quick murmur of women who have watched a card turned over and cannot yet count what it means. Anson's name went round the room the way a draft goes round a house, finding every gap. One of the younger girls, the pale one from Somerset whose mother had signed a note she did not read, put a hand to her throat. Georgiana did not look back to see it. She had learned long ago that dignity is a thing you carry out through the door yourself. No one hands it to you on the threshold. Mrs. Holloway caught her sleeve in the passage. "Miss," the housekeeper whispered. Her red hands were shaking. "Miss, this is wickedness. I'll go to her grace this instant. You will not," Georgiana said gently. "Her grace is old, and you are the only friend I leave in this house that the poor below stairs can count on. Do not spend yourself for me before the steward's eyes. It would only cost you your place, and then who mends the maid's chilblains in January? I don't care a straw for my place." "I know." Georgiana pressed the older woman's rough hand between both of hers. "That is why I care for it. Say nothing. Watch. And if a lawyer named Fanshawe should ever ask you what you saw poured on that floor this morning, you tell him, every drop of it." Mrs. Holloway's eyes filled. You knew it would come." "I knew it would come," Georgiana said. "I did not know it would come with boiling water." She went up the back stair to the box room under the eaves that had been hers since the first week, and there she took down the single bandbox that held everything she owned, a change of linen, a hairbrush worn to the wood, her mother's letters, tied in faded ribbon, and beneath them all, wrapped in a square of flannel, the parure of sapphires that had been her mother's, the one thing her father had not been able to bring himself to sell, the one thing she had carried through every reversal, like a coal kept alive under ash. She had never worn it. She had hidden it from the pawnbrokers and the bailiffs and her own hunger. She looked at it now for a long moment in the gray light of the little window, and then she wrapped it again and set it at the bottom of the box. Below, in the courtyard, she could see the wine-colored coach. A stout man in a garnet coat had descended from it and stood in conference with a groom, tapping his gold-headed cane against his boot, his rings winking even at that distance. Sir Horace Anson had come to Staveley to watch the harvest of his patience, and he did not yet know that a witness had been thrown out of the house and into the wide, indifferent world, carrying in her head the whole shape of his machine. Georgiana closed the box. She was tying her bonnet when the knock came, not the timid knock of a maid, but 3 firm strokes. She opened the door expecting the steward. It was Mr. Thaddeus Fanshawe. He stood on the narrow landing in his tobacco-brown coat, his fine spectacles fogged from the climb, a leather case pressed to his chest, and he was out of breath in the way of a man who has run where he ought to have walked. "Miss Devereux." He glanced down the stair behind him, then back. "You are dismissed. The whole house has it. They are saying His Grace himself must ratify it at noon, that the ladies have petitioned him as a body." "Then it is done," Georgiana said. "I am sorry you climbed so high to tell me." "I did not climb to tell you that." Fanshawe's ink-stained fingers tightened on the case. "I climbed because His Grace does not yet know. He rode out before dawn to the North Farms and has not returned, and Lady Augusta has timed this for the hour he cannot be reached. By the time he is back, The season's grievance will have hardened into fact, and 30 voices will swear you a fraud, and it will be his word against a room full of tears. He lowered his voice. But that is not the worst of it. Anson is here, in the yard. And a dismissed woman with no character and no roof is a woman who can be reached on the road tonight, Miss Devereux, and silenced by kinder means than the law. You know what you know. That makes you dangerous to him. And a dangerous woman turned out at dusk with a bandbox is a woman no one will think to look for. The little room was very quiet. Georgiana finished the bow of her bonnet. Her hands did not shake, and she noted that they did not, and was glad of it. You are telling me, she said, that I cannot stay, and I cannot safely go. I am telling you, Fanshawe said, that I do not know what to do, and I have never in my life said that to a client, and I am saying it to a woman who is not even mine to advise. She looked at him, at the fogged spectacles, the case of documents he had been building in secret, the honest fright of a careful man who has run up 4 flights of stairs. And something in her settled, the way the urn had settled in her hands that morning, the knowledge that when there is no safe move left, there is still a move. Then we will not choose between the two, Georgiana said. Give me your case, Miss Devereux, the papers, Mr. Fanshawe, the notes, the assignments, whatever you have gathered on Anson's monopoly of credit. You cannot carry them into that salon. You are the Duke's man, and they will say you forged them for him. But I am nobody now. I am a dismissed servant with a bandbox, and no one searches a beggar's box for a duke's salvation. She held out her hand, steady as a level. I will not leave by the front. I will go down through the kitchen, and I will wait for his grace at the North Lodge. On the road he must ride home. He will reach the gate before the ladies reach his study, and when he does, he will not meet a scandal. He will meet the whole of it in order in my hand. Fanshawe stared at her. If Anson's people find you on that road first, then they will find a woman who has already given her burden to the person it was meant for. She lifted the bandbox to her hip and settled the strap of the leather case across her shoulder beneath her gray shawl, where its shape was lost in the folds. One of us must carry this out of the house today, Mr. Fanshawe, and only one of us can do it unremarked. I have carried heavier things in this box than you know. For a moment, the lawyer did not move. Then, slowly, he took off his spectacles, wiped them on his cuff, and put them back, as though he needed to see her plainly to believe her. I will send word to the North Lodge that a friend waits there, he said. I can do that much without naming you. Do it, she said. And Mr. Fanshawe, say nothing to her grace until the Duke is home. If the Dowager storms that salon on my account, they will turn her age against her too, and I will not be the ruin of the one great lady who was kind to me. She was already on the stair. The back passages of Staveley were cold and blue with the coming afternoon, and she went down through them the way water finds its channel, past the still room and the scullery, past Mrs. Holloway, who saw the shape of the case beneath her shawl and said nothing, only pressed a heel of bread and a wedge of cheese into her hand, and turned her face to the wall so that no one might read it there. Georgiana put the food in the box. She did not stop. At the kitchen door, the gray light of the yard came in around her, and beyond the corner of the coach-house, the wine-colored traveling coach still stood, and the gold-headed cane still tapped, and Sir Horace Anson still watched the wrong door, waiting for a woman he thought was walking to her ruin. She stepped out into the cold. She turned away from the front, away from the coach, toward the long track that ran north through the bare park to the lodge and the road beyond, and she walked with her spine straight and the whole engine of his patience hidden in the folds of her shawl. Behind her, in the winter salon, 30 women waited for a noon that would not go as they had planned. Ahead of her, somewhere on the North Road, a dark horse was already turning for home. And the Duke of Staveley, who had folded his map by candlelight and vowed he would no longer sit alone at his own table, did not yet know that his table had been overturned, his witness cast out, and his salvation set walking to meet him through the winter grass. Nor that everything he needed to break Anson forever was, at that moment, tied up in a servant's bandbox and moving steadily toward the gate. The kettle screamed, and Lady Augusta lifted it high. Georgiana did not step back. She turned the tray a quarter inch, so the cup that mattered sat beneath the falling arc, and the boiling water struck porcelain instead of skin. Steam bloomed between them. A gasp went round the 30. Augusta's wrist trembled off its mark, and the copper vessel clattered to the boards, spilling a scalding tongue across the parquet that touched no one. "You clumsy thing," Augusta breathed, but her voice had lost its floor. Georgiana knelt. She righted the kettle. She wiped the boards with the hem of her own dun sleeve, spine straight, and rose again as though nothing had passed but a spilled thimble of tea. Then she reached for the caddy of lapsang and measured 3 spoons into the pot with hands that did not shake. The court had come to watch a woman ruined. They watched, instead, a woman pour. Everard stood in the doorway. He had come to observe the morning ceremony, as he did every day now, and he had seen the arc of the kettle from the threshold, seen it, and started forward, and stopped, because she had already turned the tray. He understood, in that instant, that she had been turning trays her whole life, catching what others dropped, absorbing what others threw, keeping the house standing while the house forgot her name. Something in his jaw set like mortar. Augusta recovered her poise the way a gambler recovers a losing hand. She lifted her chin toward the Dowager Duchess, who sat by the window with both hands folded on her ebony cane. "Your Grace, this creature is no gentlewoman. She is a debtor's daughter. Her father owes half of Wiltshire, and she has hidden it under an apron to worm her way into a duke's household." The word debtor landed. The 30 drew breath as one. Georgiana did not deny it. She poured the first cup and set it, without haste, on its saucer. "My father owes £1,100, she said, quite clearly. "The note is held by Sir Horace Anson. I have carried the paper since March." She lifted the cup and turned and offered it, not to Augusta, not to the court, but across the length of the winter salon, to the man in the doorway. Everard crossed the room. He crossed it the way he had once crossed a frontier, unhurried and total, and the crowd of ivory and crimson gowns parted before him without being asked. He did not look at Augusta. He did not look at the dowager. He came to the tea table, where Georgiana stood in her faded gray, and he took the cup from her hands, and he drank. Silence then. Even the fire seemed to hold its breath. "The season of selection is over," he said. He set the cup down on the saucer with a small, final click. "My choice is made." Augusta laughed, a bright, disbelieving note that died halfway out of her throat. "Your Grace cannot mean—" "I mean the servant," Everard said, "who is the only person in this house who has never once tried to sell me something." He turned, at last, and let his eyes travel across the assembled 30 in their borrowed splendor. "You may all begin packing. Mrs. Holloway will arrange your carriages." He offered Georgiana his arm. She looked at it. She looked at him. For one heartbeat, the whole architecture of her caution held her still. A lifetime of learning that a hand extended to a woman in her position was a trap wearing gloves. Then she saw his eyes, blue and cold, and utterly without appetite, asking nothing of her but that she come. She took his arm, and the two of them walked out of the winter salon, while 30 noblewomen stood among the cooling tea. He did not take her to a parlor. He took her to the library, where a fire burned and Mr. Thaddeus Fanshawe waited with a leather case already open on the table, and Georgiana understood that this had been prepared before the kettle ever rose. "I will not insult you with a proposal you cannot refuse," Everard said. He stood by the mantel, hands behind his back. "So I offer you a contract first, and let you keep your dignity while you read it." Fanshawe slid a paper toward her. Georgiana read it standing. It was not a marriage settlement. It was a deed of respect, written in the language of law, a position, a wage, a suite of rooms, the promise that no one under this roof would raise a hand or a voice to her again. And beneath it, a second paper, the assignment of a debt, £1,100, owed by Baron Devereux, purchased in full, and marked satisfied. Her fingers stopped on the word. "You bought my father's note," she said. "This morning, before the ceremony." Everard's voice did not soften, but it slowed. Anson did not wish to sell. I made it unpleasant for him to refuse. He nodded at the deed. "The debt is gone. Whatever you decide about the rest, it is gone regardless. I will not have you choosing me because you are afraid of a creditor." Georgiana set the paper down. Her hand pressed flat upon it, as though it might rise and fly away. For 11 years she had carried a folded note against her ribs like a second heartbeat, and now it was ash, and she did not know what to do with the space it left. "Why?" she said. "Because you turned the tray." He crossed to her. "Because I have sat at 100 tables where every soul present was calculating my worth in acres, and you are the only one who ever poured the tea as though I were a man who might be thirsty." What he did not say, and would not say for weeks yet, was that he had memorized the exact tilt of her wrist. "Marry me, Georgiana. Not the contract, me, but read the contract first, so you know the man is asking, and not the Duke." She read it a second time. Then she looked up. "Dismiss the ones who threw things," she said. "Not tomorrow. Now. Mrs. Holloway knows every name." Everard's mouth moved, the nearest thing to a smile his face permitted. "It is already done," she signed. The pen scratched twice, once for the deed, once beneath his name, and Fanshawe blotted the ink and closed his case with the quiet satisfaction of a man who had prepared for exactly this and been proven right. By nightfall, the courtyard rang with departing wheels. Lady Augusta left last and loudest, and swore from the window of her carriage that the Duke of Staveley would rue the day he raised a scullery drab above her blood. Mrs. Holloway watched the coach roll through the gate, jingled her ring of iron keys once, and went inside to air the best rooms. She had served the house 40 years, and she had never once, until that evening, hummed upon the stairs. 3 days later, a letter went out to a narrow house in a mean street in Bath, and Baron Devereux, stooped, his watch chain still hanging empty of the watch he had pawned, read that his daughter was to be a duchess, and his debt was dust, and he wept over the page until the ink ran, and could not for the life of him understand what she had done to earn it. He would learn, in time, that she had done nothing but be seen. It was the only thing he had never managed to do himself. The banns were read 3 Sundays. On the 4th, the season turned toward the great winter ball that Staveley gave each year for the county, and Sir Horace Anson, who had not been invited, came anyway. He came because a nabob who cannot buy a duke will settle for breaking one, and he had spent 3 weeks assembling the families whose credit he commanded into a single furious purse. He came flanked by them, rings on every finger, gold-headed cane striking the marble in time with his certainty. The ballroom blazed with 1,000 candles. Georgiana entered on the Duke's arm in Marie-Louise blue, the silk catching light like water at dawn, her mother's sapphires cool against her throat, and a single pearl pin in her dark hair. The gown had been cut without a single flounce, sober and clean against the froth of feathers and gold all around her, and it made every other woman in the room look as though she were trying too hard. The county turned to look. It had come expecting a scandal in an apron. It found, instead, a duchess in all but name, serene as a portrait, and did not quite know how to whisper. The Dowager Duchess had insisted on the sapphires. "A woman walks into a lion's den in her mother's jewels or not at all," she had said that afternoon, fastening the clasp with her own lace-gloved hands. And Georgiana had understood that the old woman was not dressing her for a ball, but arming her for a battle she already knew was coming. Anson gave the whispers their cue. "Your Grace." He planted himself at the foot of the dais, voice pitched to Carrie. "Before you crown this woman, let the county know what it curtsies to. She is the penniless daughter of a ruined baron. She scrubbed your grates, 6 months past. There is a debt behind her, a debt of £1,100, and a duke who buys a bride to hide a scandal, makes a marriage the law may set aside." He turned, slow, so the whole room drank the poison. "I hold notes on half the houses in this room, and I say this union is a fraud. Who here will gainsay a man to whom they owe their winter coal?" The families shifted behind him. No one spoke. Fear does the work that argument cannot. Everard did not raise his voice. He raised one hand. Mr. Fanshawe stepped from the crowd, ink-stained fingers steady on a leather case, and began to lay documents upon the long table beneath the candelabra, one after another, like a man dealing cards that all show the same face. "Sir Horace speaks of debts," Everard said. "Let us speak of them properly." He lifted the first page. For 2 years, Sir Horace Anson and the houses now standing at his shoulder have held the credit of this county in a single hand. They fixed the rate of every loan among themselves. They agreed, in writing, to call no debt while any one of them profited by it, and to call every debt at once the moment a man crossed them. A ring, a monopoly upon ruin. He set the page down. "It is called a combination in restraint of trade, and it is unlawful. It is also, gentlemen, treasonous in its reach, for the Crown's own revenue agents borrow through these very houses, and Sir Horace has been squeezing the king's purse alongside mine." Anson's face went from red to something grayer. "You have no—" "I have the ledgers." Fanshawe laid down the last of them. "Copied, witnessed, and lodged this morning with the Court of Chancery and the Lords of the Treasury. The originals are already in London." He looked up over his thin spectacles, mild as milk. Sir Horace kept excellent records. It was his undoing. Lord Harcourt, who owed Anson £4,000 and had come that night to see the marriage broken on his account, was the first to take a step backward. His wife took 2. A viscount who had signed the combination with his own hand found something fascinating in the pattern of the parquet and studied it with great care. The families at Anson's back understood, one by one, what the pages meant. That to stand with him now was to be named in the same suit, before the same court, under the same crown. They did not decide to abandon him. They simply began, quietly, to be elsewhere. A gap opened around the nabob, like water round a stone. "You cannot prove I ever called a debt in malice," Anson said, but he said it to a shrinking circle, and his cane had begun to knock against the marble in a rhythm he no longer commanded. "I need not prove malice," Fanshawe answered, unhurried, tapping one page. "The agreement is unlawful whether you smiled or scowled when you signed it. You wrote the rate. You wrote the terms. You initialed the clause that binds these gentlemen to call as one." He turned the sheet so the candlelight fell across a line of signatures. "Your own hand, Sir Horace." "I have merely read it aloud." "You are ruined, Sir Horace," Everard said without heat. "Not by me, by your own hand, in your own ink. Your notes are void. A court will not enforce an unlawful combination, and every man in this room you thought you owned is, as of this hour, free of you. You will leave my house. You will answer to Chancery, and you will never again set foot in a drawing room in this county, because there is not a family here that will risk being seen to know you." He nodded toward the doors. "The Treasury's men are waiting on the steps. I would not keep them." Anson looked round the ballroom for a single ally and found a wall of powdered backs. His gold cane, which had struck the marble so surely, now only trembled. He walked out between 2 silent officers, and the doors closed behind him, and the candles did not so much as flicker. For a long moment no one moved. Then the Dowager Duchess Mariel Carew rose from her chair, small and straight beneath her lace cap, and struck the floor once with her ebony cane. "Well," she said, in a voice that carried to the rafters, "that is the rubbish cleared. Now let us have the wedding." The room breathed, and laughed, and bowed. Everard turned from the ruin he had made and found, for the first time that night, that his hands were unsteady. He crossed to Georgiana, who had stood through all of it, with her chin level, and her sapphires cool, and her eyes never once leaving him. He took a small case from Fanshawe. Inside lay the coronet of the Duchesses of Staveley, worn by his mother and his mother's mother, and he lifted it in both hands. "I ruined a man before I would give you a ring," he said, low, "for her alone. I wanted the room clean before I asked. I wanted no debt, no threat, no shadow standing behind you when you took my name. Only you, and only because you chose it." "I chose it at the tea table," Georgiana said. "3 months ago, you were simply slow to notice." The corner of his mouth moved. He set the coronet upon her dark hair, above the single pearl pin, and the county sank into a curtsy and a bow that ran the length of the ballroom like a wave. For Georgiana Devereux, once a debtor's daughter in a dun cotton gown, now Duchess of Staveley. He held out his hand, not his arm, his hand. "The waltz," he said. "If your grace is not too tired from turning trays." "I have never been too tired for anything," she said, "that was worth doing." The musicians lifted their bows, and the Duke of Staveley, who had drunk his tea alone at the head of a long table for 11 years, led his wife into the center of 1,000 candles and turned her once, slowly, so the blue silk caught the light like water at dawn. The same drab girl in the same steady body, seen at last by the one man who had bothered to look, and crowned not for her blood nor her fortune nor her beauty, but for the plain, unbreakable grace of a woman who had always, no matter who was watching, poured the tea as though the thirsty man before her were worth the pouring. If this story moved you, stop for a moment and reflect. How many people around you carry a folded paper of their own, a private ruin they guard in silence, while serving those who never look twice? Have you ever, like Georgiana, mistaken someone's quiet composure for weakness, when it was the last thing the world had not stripped from them? And when the tea table became the only place a duke could be a man and not a coffer, did it make you wonder where in your own life you are truly seen? Tell us your experiences and feelings in the comments. We read them all. And if you believe in stories about dignity, justice, and love that arrives against all odds, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a part of our community and help the channel.